Chris Martin here in the Martin Museum. Unfortunately, during this pandemic, the museum's closed. This time of year, it would be packed. Who knows in the summer? We never know how many people are going to show up to take the factory tour, see the museum, go in the gift shop, play the guitars in the lobby. So I thought, it may be a while since you do get to come and visit. Why don't I give you a personal tour of the Martin Museum? So today I'm going to talk about C.F. Martin Sr., and I have to share something really cool with you. Yesterday was my 65th birthday. Got my Medicare card, and my sister, the artist, Georgianne, sent me a really cool gift. The man himself, my great-great-great-grandfather. What's cool about this? It's a daguerreotype. And I don't know how she took an old picture and made a daguerreotype out of it. But Georgianne, thank you for the wonderful gift. So let's talk about C.F. Sr. Started out working with his father in Markneukirchen in Lower Saxony, making furniture. We don't know much more than that. We know he was apprenticed in the Cabinet Makers Guild, worked with his father briefly. We know he took an interest in the guitar. Now Markneukirchen back then, and really up until the time that the wall came down, was one of several cities in eastern Germany where they made musical instruments. One of the instruments Markneukirchen was famous for is what I call, and some people may take offense to this, the flea market Stradivarius. I actually got a chance to go to Markneukirchen after the wall came down, and they had a museum dedicated to musical instruments. Apparently Markneukirchen, when the wall was up, was a place that people from the east would go in the summer to recreate. They had a lot of music. I said to the museum director, why isn't there anything in the museum acknowledging C.F. Martin Sr.? And he said, oh, we knew all about him. And we were very proud of his work and his career. I said, yeah, so why isn't there anything on display in the museum? And he said, well, it was illegal. I said, what was illegal? He said, back when the wall was up, it was illegal to acknowledge the existence of anyone who left. I said, he left in 1833. There was no wall. The gentleman who ran the museum said, didn't matter. These Germans didn't want to give anyone the idea that they could leave. The guitar is an ancient instrument, and historians have traced instruments that have guitar-like qualities back to Mesopotamia. But they were pretty crude. The instrument evolved over hundreds and hundreds of years, so by the late early 1800s, you would look at that instrument and go, yeah, that's a guitar. It's a little guitar, but that's my idea of a guitar. C.F. must have been very persuasive with his father, because despite the fact that I am sure his father wanted him to join the family furniture making business, his father helped him get a job to learn how to build guitars. The first place he suggested C.F. look was in Markneukirchen. Go ask the violin makers if they will take you on as an apprentice and you can learn how to build musical instruments. He said, Dad, I want to build guitars. He said, well, see if they're interested. Maybe they can teach you something. They were not. At that point in time, the violin makers in Markneukirchen were very dismissive of the guitar. Oh, it's a folk instrument. It's not an orchestral instrument. It's a fad. It's not going to last. And so they were like, nope, don't bother. Stick with furniture. Somehow or another, with his father's help, he got a job at the Stauffer workshop in Vienna, Austria, at the age of 15. He had already apprenticed as a cabinet maker, and now, as a young man, he's learning an entire new skill. Worked and lived in Vienna, worked with Mr. Stauffer for several years, learned how to build Stauffer-style guitars, befriended an older co-worker, and as often happens, they got a little moxie and said, you know what, we're going to go off on our own. We're going to start our own guitar building business in Vienna, which they did. It was not successful. There was one bit of success that came out of that partnership. My great-great-great-grandfather married that gentleman's daughter, and they had a son, and C.F. decided to go back to Markneukirchen and hang out his shingle. Now that he knew what he was doing, he wanted to take his bride back to where he grew up and start his career as a guitar builder in a town of musical instrument makers. So he comes back home, and lo and behold, while he was away, the violin makers came to the realization that the guitar was not a fad, and it's becoming more and more popular, and so they got into the guitar business. And CF comes and says, this is great, we can all do it together, and they go, slow down there, buddy. you're not apprenticed. You know, it's still the law today in Germany. And there's actually discussion about the value of it versus the time. These apprenticeships take years. Now, you come out the other side knowing exactly what you're doing. In fact, I watched a show once about that program in Germany, and one of the first things that they do is they teach you how to make the tools that you're going to use to make the thing you're going to learn how to make. So that's pretty serious. And they said, CF, you were apprenticed as a cabinet maker. So in Germany, you can make all the furniture you want, but you cannot legally make guitars without apprenticing. And we might consider taking you on as apprentice. As you know, it will take several years. And he went home and talked with his wife, and he said, this isn't working. I'm ready to go. I got to start building some guitars. And so they came to the conclusion that it was time to go. And I think one of the motivating factors may have been that in 1832, his father passed away. And so now there's not as much of a connection, because in Germany and Europe at that time, the firstborn son really was the next generation. Well, now that, his father was no longer around, he didn't feel obliged to, shepherd the family furniture making business forward. But there was some other stuff going on in Europe, and I read it just because I'm curious now about pandemics, reading a little bit about the plague, which was way before CF. Tragically, so many people died that the people that survived came to the realization that their labor was more valuable than they were being compensated for it. And they were able to go to the landowners and say, I want a raise. The landowner had never heard that before. It's like, you're a serf, you don't ask for a raise. If I feel like it, I'll give you one when I'm in the mood. And they said, no. I know there is opportunity elsewhere, because so many of us workers have died that if you don't want to pay me a living wage, I'll go somewhere else. And so it raised opportunity for a lot of people in Europe that prior to that felt very oppressed. It also caused a lot of turmoil because the power elite were very concerned about this transfer of power. And so imagine living in this dynamic where, okay, my dad's dead, the violin makers don't really like me, there's some weird stuff going on politically around Europe. It's time to get out of here. And so in the fall of 1833, he packed up his family. Now he has a daughter, son, daughter, wife, worldly possessions, tools, raw materials, and probably some finished guitars. Dick Boak and I had the opportunity a couple years ago to stand right here with James Westbrook. And James is a very knowledgeable European guitar historian. And he said, Chris, think about this. CF more than likely had a crate. And in that crate, not only were there tools and raw materials, there were probably a couple of finished guitars, so that when he arrived in the New World, he could get some cash flowing. That he didn't have to spend the first couple of months building guitars. So they get up to Bremen, sailed across the Atlantic, and in November, they land in Manhattan. You went to Manhattan or Boston or Philly. They chose Manhattan, and he rented a shop at 196 Hudson Street.